What if I told you that the woman the world knows today as Catherine, Princess of Wales, has a family story that stretches far beyond the glamorous world of palaces, royal weddings, and British aristocracy? When most people hear the name Catherine, Princess of Wales, they immediately think of the British royal family. They think of Prince William, Kensington Palace, royal ceremonies, elegant fashion, and the future of the monarchy. But before she became one of the most recognizable women in the world, Catherine Elizabeth Middleton came from a family whose history was much more complicated and much more fascinating than many people realize. And the surprising part is this: her family tree does not simply tell the story of a future princess. It tells the story of ordinary working people, successful businessmen, landed families, professionals, Northern English communities, and ancestors whose lives were connected to some remarkable chapters of British history. So today, we're going to step away from the palace gates and travel backward through Catherine's family tree. And by the end of this journey, you may look at the Princess of Wales in a completely different way. Because her story isn't simply about marrying into royalty. It's about how generations of people, living very different lives, eventually created the family from which one of Britain's most famous modern royals emerged. Catherine was born on January 9, 1982, at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading, England. She was the eldest of 3 children born to Michael and Carole Middleton. And that detail is important, because when Catherine entered the royal family through her marriage to Prince William in 2011, she did not come from a traditionally aristocratic household. She wasn't born with a royal title. She wasn't raised inside a royal palace. And her family name was not connected to the British throne in the way people might imagine. Instead, Catherine grew up in a family that had built its own success. Her parents eventually became successful through their business, Party Pieces, a company associated with children's party supplies. That family background became an important part of the story surrounding Catherine. She represented something different, a woman who had entered one of the world's most famous royal families without being born into it. But here's where her ancestry becomes much more interesting. Because although the Middletons were not a royal dynasty, Catherine's family tree reaches into several layers of British social history. And one of the most fascinating branches leads to the Lupton family of Yorkshire. The Luptons were associated with Leeds and belonged to the world of the landed and professional classes. Several generations of Catherine's ancestors were connected with Potter Newton Hall, an important family estate near Leeds. Think about that for a moment. Long before Catherine stood beside Prince William at Westminster Abbey, some of her ancestors were living in a very different kind of privileged environment. Not royal privilege, but established wealth, education, property, and social influence. One particularly interesting ancestor was Catherine's great-grandmother Olive Christiana Middleton, who was born Olive Lupton. Her family connection to the Luptons means that Catherine's ancestry reaches into a family that had been prominent in Yorkshire for generations. And this is one of the reasons the simple description of Catherine as having a completely ordinary family background doesn't tell the whole story. Her ancestry contains different social worlds. On one side, there are people connected with landed families and professional life. On other branches, there are ancestors whose lives were much closer to ordinary working communities. And that contrast is what makes her family history so fascinating, because ancestry isn't a straight line from privilege to privilege. It's a complicated web. People marry, families move, fortunes rise and fall, occupations change, and ordinary people can eventually become ancestors of extraordinary historical figures. Catherine's maternal family adds another remarkable dimension to the story. Her mother, Carol Middleton, was born Carol Goldsmith, and the Goldsmith side of the family had working class roots in County Durham. This is one of the most interesting aspects of Catherine's ancestry, because when you trace her family backward, you don't find one single social class repeated generation after generation. Instead, you find a mixture. There were people connected to coal mining communities. There were domestic servants. There were professionals. There were businessmen. There were people associated with land and property. And there were families who experienced the enormous social changes that transformed Britain over the 19th and 20th centuries. This is a reminder that the people we see today are often the result of hundreds of years of unexpected family connections. A person doesn't inherit only a surname, they inherit a story. And Catherine's story contains plenty of surprises. Now here's another fascinating part. Genealogists have traced Catherine's ancestry back many generations, and some of those lines connect her to people who lived on both sides of the Atlantic. A genealogy published by the New England Historic Genealogical Society identified connections between Catherine's ancestry and notable historical Americans, including George Washington, as well as other prominent figures. But there is something important to understand here. When you hear that a royal is related to a famous historical figure, it doesn't mean that they were close relatives in the modern sense. Genealogical relationships can be extremely distant. The further back you travel, the more family trees overlap, and that is precisely what makes genealogy so fascinating. Imagine taking a family tree and moving backward one generation at a time. Your parents become 4 grandparents, then 8 great-grandparents, then 16 great-great-grandparents. Keep going, and the number grows rapidly. Eventually, you are looking at hundreds and then thousands of ancestral positions. And because families have been marrying and moving across regions for centuries, those branches can connect in unexpected ways. So Catherine's distant connections to historical figures are fascinating not because they prove some secret royal identity, but because they reveal how interconnected historical families could become. And there's another misconception worth clearing up. Catherine did not need a hidden royal bloodline to become part of the royal family. Her connection to the monarchy came through her marriage to Prince William. She became a member of the royal family in 2011. Later, after King Charles III became monarch, William became the Prince of Wales, and Catherine became the Princess of Wales. Her official royal biography describes her work supporting the monarchy and her charitable interests, particularly around early childhood and children's well-being. And this actually creates an interesting connection to her family history, because some members of Catherine's extended ancestry were involved in education, medicine, social causes, and public life. In other words, the family story isn't only about money or status, it's also about professions and public service. Take the Lupton family again. Several generations of Catherine's ancestors were involved in professional life in Yorkshire. One ancestor, Thomas Michael Greenhow, was a surgeon and epidemiologist. His daughter, Frances Elizabeth Lupton, was involved in education, and her son Francis Martineau Lupton was a prominent figure in Leeds. These people lived more than a century ago, in a Britain that was radically different from the country we know today. There were no smartphones, no social media, no television. Travel was slower. Medicine was very different. And yet their lives became part of the chain that eventually led to Catherine. That's the strange beauty of genealogy. People who had absolutely no idea that their descendants would one day be watched by millions of people around the world were simply living their lives. They worked, they married, they raised children, they made decisions, and history carried their family lines forward. Now imagine Catherine standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. Millions of cameras are pointed toward her. Crowds are cheering. She is wearing the clothing expected of a senior member of the royal family. To the world, it looks like a completely royal moment. But behind that moment is a family tree filled with people who lived ordinary lives. Farmers, workers, professionals, business owners, families from Yorkshire, families from County Durham, and people whose names would have been completely unknown to the public. That contrast is perhaps the most fascinating part of Catherine's ancestry. Her story demonstrates that modern royalty isn't always as distant from ordinary British society as people imagine. The monarchy may be ancient, but the families who marry into it can have much more modern and diverse histories. And Catherine's journey is a perfect example. She wasn't born a princess. She wasn't raised as the future wife of a king. Her childhood included a period in Jordan when her father was working there, and the family later returned to England. She attended school, went to the University of St. Andrews, and eventually met Prince William. The relationship developed over the years before their engagement and marriage, and on April 29, 2011, the woman who had once simply been Catherine Middleton walked into Westminster Abbey and became the wife of the future king. That wedding transformed her public identity, but it did not erase everything that came before. If anything, it made her family history even more interesting, because suddenly millions of people wanted to know who exactly was Catherine Middleton. Where did her family come from? Were the Middletons aristocrats? Did she have royal ancestors? Were there famous people in her family tree? And the answer to those questions is much more complicated than a simple yes or no. Her family history contains connections to the landed gentry and professional classes. It also contains working class roots. There are Northern English connections. There are transatlantic genealogical connections. There are people connected to medicine and education. And there are family branches that experienced the dramatic economic changes of industrial Britain. So perhaps the biggest surprise isn't that Catherine has famous ancestors. The bigger surprise is just how many different worlds meet inside one family tree. And that's something many people can relate to. Because if you trace almost anyone's ancestry far enough, you begin discovering unexpected stories. A great-grandparent who lived somewhere you never knew about. A family occupation that disappeared generations ago. A distant relative connected to a historical event. A branch of the family that suddenly became wealthy. Another branch that struggled. Our ancestors rarely fit neatly into the categories we create for ourselves today. And Catherine's family is no different. The difference is that her family tree eventually led to one of the most visible positions in modern Britain. There is also something deeply symbolic about that. The British monarchy has existed for centuries, yet modern Britain is constantly changing. People from different backgrounds become part of institutions that once seemed completely closed to them. Catherine's journey from Catherine Middleton to Princess of Wales is one example of that transformation. Her ancestry does not need to be exaggerated to be fascinating. In fact, the documented story is already remarkable enough. She has a family history that crosses social classes, regions, professions, and generations. And perhaps that is why the story continues to attract so much attention. Because underneath the title, underneath the royal ceremonies and underneath the photographs, there is still a human story, a family story, a story about people who lived before Catherine was ever born. People who could never have imagined that their descendants would one day stand at the centre of the British monarchy. So the next time you see Catherine, Princess of Wales, remember that you're not simply looking at a royal title. You're looking at the final result of generations of family history. A history that includes Yorkshire estates, northern working communities, professional families, entrepreneurs, and ordinary people whose names have largely disappeared from public memory. And perhaps that is the most unexpected thing about her ancestry. Not that it is secretly royal, but that it is surprisingly human, because history is rarely as simple as the labels we give people: royal, aristocrat, middle class, working class, ordinary. Famous behind every one of those words is a much more complicated story. And Catherine's story proves just how quickly those worlds can intersect. From the industrial north of England to the halls of Westminster Abbey, from family businesses to the heart of the British monarchy, from ancestors whose lives were never recorded in headlines to a woman whose every public appearance can become global news. That is the journey hidden inside Catherine's family tree, and honestly, that may be far more fascinating than any fairy tale version of royal ancestry, because sometimes the most surprising royal stories begin long before the crown ever enters the picture. If you enjoyed discovering this lesser known side of Catherine, Princess of Wales, don't leave just yet. There are countless royal family stories hiding behind the names we think we already know, unexpected connections, forgotten ancestors, extraordinary family journeys, and historical details that can completely change the way we see famous people. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like, share it with someone who loves royal history and family mysteries, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there are many more fascinating royal stories coming your way. And tell me in the comments, which part of Catherine's ancestry surprised you the most? Was it the Yorkshire Lupton connection? The working class roots on her mother's side? The distant connections to famous historical figures? Or simply the fact that her family tree brings together so many different layers of British history? Let me know. Because sometimes the most interesting stories aren't the ones written inside the palace. They're the ones hidden inside the family tree. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.